Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guest today is Sam Boer, one of the composers of Ursa, a folk musical, a gorgeous theatre concert hybrid that received its world premiere in 2022 as part of the Toronto Fringe NextStage Festival. Ursa has been performed across Canada, including the Watershed Festival and the Bon Echo Provincial Park. And at Bon Echo Provincial Park. At the end of 2023, it was available to stream via StratFest at Home, the Stratford Festival's online streaming platform, and was named by The Guardian as one of the best theatre shows to stream. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much, Louisa. Happy to be here.
It is my pleasure. So to start us off with, what made you fall in love with musical theatre?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, great starting question. A friend of my mom's was in a production of Hairspray in Toronto when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 6 or 7. So I remember having no context for musicals at all. We weren't a household that listened to many musicals growing up. But I remember going to that show and just being mesmerized, transported. And then he took us on a little backstage tour and we got to meet a few of the actors. And it was really transformative. Went home with a signed poster, hung it up in my room, and that's what got me into it.
Oh, I love that. I love Hairspray is the gateway drug. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. Musical anyone could love, for sure.
And it just occurred to me, there are tons of musicals that have been filmed live in Canada, and particularly in Toronto. And I'm thinking of like Pigeon was filmed there in the 70s. No, yeah, the late 70s. And one of the earliest ones, Showgirl, was filmed in, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, Etobicoke.
Oh, in Etobicoke, yeah.
Yeah. The K is silent.
Yes, that's right.
Of course it is.
Just to make it more complicated for you.
Yes. But that was filmed in like the 60s with Carol Channing and was like an early broadcast on an early form of pay TV. So Toronto has like a lot of history when it comes to filmed live musicals.
Yeah, the real thriving history. And even to this day, I feel like it's very inviting to all kinds of musicals. The like indie musical scene in Toronto is something I think is very exciting.
Yeah, something I was excited when I was researching your show and the work that you do was the collectives that you and that one of your cast members is a part of. Like it seems like there's like this real like grassroots initiatives happening.
Yeah, that's one thing, Louisa, that felt necessary when developing this show. I think that I've enjoyed musicals for a lot of my life. I'm mainly a folk musician, but musicals were always a kind of another love. But it always felt kind of insurmountable to write your own musical, because it's one thing to write a folk song or a folk album and get a few friends together and record it. But who writes a musical and gets a cast together and a director and lighting? And there's so many elements. And if you don't have access to funding and space, it can feel really daunting. So I think Jake and I and a lot of other folks have taken the approach of let's try and do it kind of like a rock band or something. Just get a bunch of friends together to play around, try stuff out. You know, how can we make a folk song work in a musical? How can we make minimal lighting and grassroots efforts end up in a musical context? So it's always exciting to me.
And so speaking of the collective, you're part of and you founded the Uncommon Folk Collective, which is a group of songwriters and performers crafting music for theater experiences. And your collaborator is Jake Schindler?
That's right. Yeah, Jake and I write together.
And so how did the collective come to be, and how did you and Jake come to know each other?
Jake and I got to know each other. We both went to school in London, Ontario, to Western University, and we were both. They have this first year orientation program, so where a bunch of upper year students help out with first years. It's a really intense, amazing experience. But we were both in the music faculty at the time. And every year, the music faculty, they call them SOFs, these first year orientation volunteers. Every year, they do a bunch of parody songs and perform them on stage for this, group of 1,000 incoming students. It's a really exciting thing at that age. And Jake and I got teamed up. A dear friend of ours, Liv Cazzola, said, "Hey, I think Jake and Sam would get along well. We should get them together to write these parodies of pop songs for this stage for the concert." And so that's how Jake and I met. We were collaborating from pretty much day one. In this case, doing Lords Royals as what was our parody of it? We did a bunch of pop parodies together, but kind of after that day, we worked together really nicely. So it was a
Oh,
few years
fun.
later that Jake just reached out and said, "Hey Sam, I wrote these 3 folk songs, and I think we should try to do a show." And I said, maybe." And then 2 years later, we'd written this musical together.
What were the parodies about? Were they about like college life or just about like everything and anything?
Oh yeah, college life. You know, I wish I could come up with some examples on the spot, but just goofy stuff. Jake and I were both camp counselors and have taught young children, so that was also, it felt very natural to be goofy together.
I saw that you both have a background in music education. So now I'm curious, what led you to studying music at a college level? And where does the folk music fit into all of that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, Jake studied percussion at Western and is an amazing pianist and an orchestrator and a copyist. So he can really do it all. I can't read music very well. I'm not great with notation, but I got into music playing in funk bands and then rock bands and then folk music. So I loved writing songs. I loved playing music with people. Um, but a traditional music degree wasn't quite up my alley um, because I'm more of a singer songwriter. So it's thanks to Western has this pop music program where you go in and you can study more pop song structures and the Canadian music industry, that sort of stuff. I got to learn how to mix and master, do digital recording stuff. So that was how we got to meet. They have this special program.
That's super cool. I love that it combined like theory and practical, that you're able to learn like actual life skills of recording and mixing in
Yeah.
addition to like the writing part. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. It's hard to teach beyond the classical music context, I find, or maybe jazz as well, because there's such a developed curriculum for that. I feel like people are still figuring out how does pop music work at a university level. But
Mm.
I'll always be grateful for meeting all these people through that and learning how to record and to play around.
That's how inspiring. That's super cool. And then to go back to the Uncommon Folk Collective. So Jake called you one day and said, "Hey, let's do a thing."
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so we started with this Ursa, a folk musical show, which just developed. We met every week. Basically, from the right before the pandemic, we had started writing. Pandemic hits. We think, let's just keep meeting and see what happens. So we meet every week until this show is written. And that's kind of when the idea for the Uncommon Folk Collective happened, which it's a little bit tongue in cheek, Louisa. I feel like everyone who um, is in a band for long enough or who goes to theater school comes out of it and they're like, well, we got to keep this going. Let's get a collective. Like, let's name ourselves and do a bunch of productions and do a bunch of albums.
We're gonna
Everyone thinks,
change the world.
yeah, yes, there's a lot of that, which I love. And I think this is kind of a nod to that because the Uncommon Folk Collective is basically just Jake and I and people we love who we think are incredibly talented, but it's not a fixed entity. It's always expanding to who is involved on what kind of project. We did a show about the life and music of Joni Mitchell over this past summer, and so that was kind of an Uncommon Folk Collective project with some new amazing actor musicians. So we want to be as flexible as the projects we're able to take on.
I wanted to ask about that. Is there a recording of that one too?
No, not at the moment. Oh.
Boo.
I know, I would love that. Because are you a Joni Mitchell fan?
Yes, of course.
Does it need to be asked? I guess. That's what I was so impressed with, how like Joni Mitchell is just beloved by everybody, and she went through, so many distinct phases of her career, really pushing the envelope. And people, looking back, it's amazing how everyone can find something of hers to love.
Yeah. Everyone has that song that touches their heart.
Yeah. But yeah, the
Um,
roundabout way of explaining the collective. So yeah, it's an
yeah.
ongoing thing of bringing people together for particular projects as it makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like, if you want to get ahead in this business, you have to be making your own work. I mean, it's just so important. And I think it's so great that you have this background um, in the practical skills through your degree, that like you're able to implement that and bring that into the work that you're doing. So let's talk about Ursa, which I'm just going to read the blurb for it. An anxious bear with an identity crisis, a small town Ontario teenager desperate for change, a star-crossed friendship set to 21st century folk song. This is Ursa, a folk musical, a whimsical theater concert hybrid that will leave you starry-eyed, breathless, and hopeful. And I have to say, I felt all those things when I was able to watch the capture that you had put up, that was available briefly at StratFest at home. And I'm so thankful that you shared the link with me. So let's talk about what inspired the show to start with.
First of all, you could be our narrator, Louisa. I love the way you read that. That was fabulous.
Available for hire.
Um, so Ursa started, like I said, over the pandemic. We were writing, and it was Jake and I we hadn't collaborated since this little thing at Western, since writing parodies of pop songs together. So it was a huge question of what kind of music we'd write, how we would approach it, what it would actually be in the end. And I'm really grateful that, because it was our first musical, we didn't try to answer too many of those questions as we got started. We went into it saying, we know we can write songs together. We know that we love doing that. You can just tell right away. But we had no sense of story or character or setting or any of that. We just said, let's just start writing songs and see where it takes us. So it was about, like I said, we were meeting every week over the pandemic. And it was only once we got 4 or 5 songs together that we noticed some themes emerging. We're like, oh, it seems like there's a character who seems like they're restless and maybe they're leaving home. And then there's this other character that seems like they're anxious and kind of trapped. It was during the pandemic, so feeling trapped and anxious was par for the course.
A good theme, yes.
Yeah.
Strong theme.
But that character, which it's a projection of myself for sure. It just became characterized as a bear very suddenly. We were thinking about hibernation and emergence, and it seemed like the perfect metaphor for how people with anxiety can cope with it. You bundle yourself up and you hide yourself away, but eventually the world beckons you out again. And so once we had those characters, we were really off to the races, and the songs kept pouring out.
Is the device of the grandmother as the inspiration for the storytelling, is that fictional or is it based in any truth?
It's it's a bit of a combination of truth and fiction. Um, it's a lot of Jake and I were having conversations about family history and heritage and how we make sense of ourselves, not having deep connections to our family lines. We have thankfully a relationship with my Oma is still alive, and Jake has had some relationship with his grandparents, but beyond that, there's no real feeling of family connectedness through the generations, which I think a lot of people are dealing with now. More than ever, we're disconnected from that sense of I'm connected to this long line. And so we were thinking about all of the kind of elders who have taken that place in our lives. And for me, as a folk musician growing up in Guelph, there's this amazing group of um, older folk women in the community who really have supported a whole generation of young folk musicians, including people like my piano teacher, Sue Smith, and Tana Sliman, an amazing musician, Catherine Wheatley. I'll just shout them out on the podcast. Why not? But we were thinking about just the role of an elder, basically, and someone to tell you a story, to give you meaning to your life. So the grandmother is kind of a patchwork of all of these amazing elder women in our lives.
Oh, that's very beautiful. I love that nod to even if there is like a kind of disconnect for folks, there's still there are still teachers in our community and still people that we can look up to and learn stories from.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, trying to um, reclaim that idea of eldership. And it was kind of a funny thing to project it into the show, but I think in a way it was a lot of the show is very utopian, and that's an element of something we just want to see more of in the world. Cherishing a story, trying to tell a story that will resonate 4 or 5 generations down the line.
Yeah. And I love, not to give too much away for folks that still want to watch it, but I love the metaphor of who the bear is and who Ursa is and what that means for us as individuals and the idea of inner and outer world. It's very beautiful.
Well, thank you, Louisa. Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. And so in the production there you have 4 actor musicians of which you are one. And so what was the process for kind of getting the show from page to stage? What was the decision to use 4 actor musicians?
Yeah, it was a big process. I think it was honestly, Louisa, less of a active decision and more of a let's make this happen however we can. Jake and I are writing a
Necessity
new
is the mother of all invention.
That's right, yeah. Jake and I are writing a new show right now where we actually are thinking like, oh, how many people do we want? And let's be thoughtful about this. But with Ursa, it was more, okay, we have 2 main characters. We're not going to be playing them, so we should get a couple of other folks on board, and then we can be the band, the kind of narrating band in the back. But it started. Jake is such a go-getter, and I love him for that. And one of the things that Jake pushed us to do was just apply for a couple of things. So once we had a very loose script and a bunch of songs together, we applied to the Watershed Music Theatre Festival, which is in Kingston, Ontario. And we thankfully got into that. So we got a little bit of money to do a filmed version of an excerpt of our show. And this was during the very heart of the pandemic. So it was all via Zoom. Got a couple of our friends on board. Mingja Chen, who's incredible. And then Belinda Corpus was playing Ursa, who still plays Ursa to this day. And just having a couple $1,000s and the ability to put together 10 minutes of a video recording was so empowering. We got Margot Grieve, our director, on board too, and suddenly we had costumes from Margot and a sense of our setting. And it's amazing. Like, it's one thing to have the show on paper, but really to feel, even with that remote distance, like, oh yeah, this is a world we're creating together. That was incredible.
This was during the pandemic. Were you working in isolation via Zoom, or were you able to meet in person?
Yeah, this was all during Zoom. I think this was, there were so many waves of COVID. I can't remember which one. But it was quite a thing we developed a bunch of click tracks and sent them out. So we're all wearing, headphones in the recording, and we played, by ourselves. It was very lonely doing that part, but then the moment we put the videos together, you realize like, oh yeah, this is all going towards
This is a thing.
yeah. So that got presented publicly,
Mm.
and then that just led to a few other opportunities, and with each one we kind of expanded. We got to write more of the script, we got to refine the songs, and the Fringe NextStage show, which you saw, which Stratford put on their site, was the first true full incarnation of this.
I want to see the Zoom version. I want to see the early incarnation.
Oh, I wonder.
I want to see I want to trace the development.
That's so sweet. Yeah, it might be on our YouTube page, our Ursa YouTube page. But it's so funny looking at it now. You know, we have one moment in the show where the two characters are looking up at a starry sky, and I superimposed like a star background on the on the video. It felt, it was what we could do with the materials at hand.
But also you feel so fancy when you learn when you figure that out. It's like
yeah, of course. Like, wow, I could go work for Pixar or something.
I'm basically a video editor now.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like for, as you grow as writers and continue this journey of being artists, allowing people to like see the process of, and track the development of a show and kind of become fans of a show and be able to be a part of its development from right from the beginning. So I'm sure you have people that have been following you since that very first Zoom reading all the way, to you've now also performed the show live.
That's such a good point, Louisa. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, our partners and families and people who were there from the very beginning, weighing in. My partner Anita is an amazing folk musician as well, and she did all of the original vocal demos just because Jake and I thought, oh, we need someone to sing these. It's the middle of the pandemic. Oh, Anita, do you mind stepping in?
Honey, please.
Yeah. So that's always like the invisible labor of family and friends is really incredible for any musical. I mean, at any level.
Mm.
But there were also some, like I mentioned, these folk people in Guelph, like the folk community was so supportive as well. And it was all virtual, of course. So we were getting messages and it was feeling nice having people tune into the show. But then we just did an in-person tour of the show to a few different Ontario cities. And it was really the first time we got to play it for our own communities, our first Guelph show, our first Toronto show in person. And so seeing people's faces, seeing people actually show up and enjoy the show was so heartening.
That's I can imagine like that rush of excitement and pride and all the feelings that come with being able to put on a show. It's like it's no small feat. It really it's an extraordinary achievement. To go back to the NextStage Festival with the Toronto Fringe, so that was also virtual, but you were able to capture the show. What was the process there?
So it was really a wild process getting that off the ground. We were accepted into NextStage with the intention of doing a live theater run. So in the way that a typical Fringe would work, we have 8 dates spaced out over 2 weeks, and we had gotten our team together for that. We'd gotten a lighting designer, our stage manager, Margot Grieve was directing again. We had our actors, but it was
that
also
was Belinda Corpus and Stephen Ingram.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we were both incredible. So we had gone into it with that intention, and of course, this was right before January 2022, before a huge COVID wave that winter. So I remember I was driving into Toronto, I think it was January 2nd maybe, to meet with Jake, and we had a Zoom call with all of the Fringe NextStage people, basically saying, we don't know what's going on. Something's going to change in the next couple days. Let's all get together and talk about what we're going to do. So we had scheduled our first rehearsal date on, I think, the 5th of January, and we were finding out the day before whether we were going to put this on an actual stage or find some other solution. The word pivot was used 500 times. But they made the decision to film all of the shows, so to offer the space, offer a film crew, do it with all the safety protocols. And so we did all of our rehearsals in Toronto, fully masked at a distance. And then when we did the actual filming, Louisa, it was so wild looking back. Biggest snowstorm in Toronto in maybe 3-4 years. So it's middle of COVID, huge snowstorm. Jake and I are in a U-Haul, carrying our set to the theater, and just running red lights because we're stuck on this ice and just can't slow down. Our cast is trudging through snow. The TTC, the subway's all shut down, so people are getting in Ubers, having to jump out because they get stuck in the snow. So the fact that we could all get to the theater on the day of filming and that nobody got sick during our rehearsals, everyone was healthy and careful, is a small miracle.
I'm having anxiety just sitting here hearing this. I can't imagine what it was like in the moment.
I know. I couldn't believe it, Louisa. I had stayed over Toronto the night after we filmed. Jake and I just, collapsed in a heap at his apartment. And I walk outside, my car is just under 8 feet of snow. Like, I couldn't believe it. But that was kind of the beauty of it too, doing a show at that time, was there was so much else going on that you didn't really have time to think, what are we doing here? Like, I guess sometimes there's this imposter syndrome, especially when you're doing like our first musical with this whole team around us. It would have been easy to maybe overthink things, but because we were so focused on just getting there, doing the thing, there was no time to really overthink.
Yeah.
I'm looking back, I'm kind of grateful for that.
Yeah. So did Next Wave provide like the space and the filming equipment? Like how was the setup how did that work?
They were incredible. Yeah. So they connected us with this film company in Toronto who came in and handled all of the filming.
Mm.
And they also provided this Daniel Spectrum, this beautiful space near downtown Toronto. So it was basically all we had to do was roll in with our crew, our director. We had lighting and stage taken care of. But then they had the whole IATSE theater crew there and the filming.
Mm.
So it's really amazing that they got that together within 2 weeks for
Wow.
a handful of shows.
Yeah. And did you rehearse with the film crew beforehand, or was it like what was the rehearsal process for the filming?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was pretty unusual in that we essentially had one phone call and then we were in the space with the film crew figuring it out.
Wow.
So
Huh.
there was such a tight timeline, and they were obviously busy with other things in between. So we talked about our basic approach, but then it was just a lot of trust and a lot of on the ground experimentation. I mean, we had our lighting designer Matilda Kane, and then our director Margot, and then Taylor Young, our stage manager, were at a table, basically just going. We'd load it in. They would just quickly check things. We teched everything on the first day. Did a walkthrough, but that was it basically. They were just like, okay, shot is good. Next one, move that light a little bit. Okay, we're good. And then we filmed. We did a few full runs of the show, but that was it.
Wow. And is Matilda, as your lighting designer, does she work primarily with stage or film or both?
Mostly with stage.
Yeah. What did she have to adjust like what she had planned? I'm guessing like that the film crew had ideas about how to make it work for camera, but I'm curious about like how that translated.
Totally. That's such a good question. And Matilda and Margot kept pulling us over to look at the monitor um, of what they were grabbing.
Mm.
And they kept saying, we're having to make it 5 times darker than we ever would have to for a live performance.
Yeah.
That's what really took a while to get used to, is just darker, darker, darker. And we were on stage and it felt way too dark. I just thought, oh, no one's gonna see it.
Am I
It's
in
too
my light?
moody. Yeah. But that was the biggest hurdle. But once they got a couple of shots that looked beautiful,
Yeah.
it was easy going from there.
And you mentioned you ran the show a few times. Was it filmed in like in one go, or did you do like different numbers with different takes?
We did trying to remember, Louisa. I think because I think we ended up going with one full single take, other than a couple of very small edits. But it's almost all taken from one performance of the show,
Mm.
which just I find with that, with this filming and then with recording albums as well, it seems to be whenever you can just get a full performance or do like a full vocal take for a song and use as much of it as you can. There's some continuity to it. It's hard to put into words, but I think that's why we decided to do that.
Yeah, and it really does feel like I'm watching a live stream. Like the way, I mean, part of that's the banter. I love the banter that you do at the beginning and like the thanking the audience. I think that's really, really lovely. Um, but it feels like it was live, even though there's no audience in the room. It does feel like a live performance.
Well, that's great. Yeah. There were, I should say as well, the film crew had the great idea of getting some insert shots that Margot really helped direct, just to make it feel even more alive. So that was one other thing, is that we did a couple of close-up inserts of our characters interacting.
Mm. Like doing those like pickup shots.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. When they're doing little bits of choreography, that was helpful.
Yeah. And it's so seamlessly edited. Like I truly, if you hadn't told me, I would have said that this was a live stream, that like you were in a room one night, you live streamed it to an audience, and like that's how seamless it feels.
Well, that's so good to hear. Yeah. Shout out to Kicking Tire Films. I mean, they were incredible at that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I also have to shout out the set. It's so simple but so effective, and this gorgeous backdrop that you have. And I'm reading the name and thinking this is possibly your partner, Anita Cazzola.
You got it. Yeah.
Hey. Connecting the
Oh,
dots.
yeah, you got it. That was another thing where, I mean, Anita put that together in, I think, one night, maybe 2 nights. I just got home from a rehearsal and we thought, our set was coming together. Margot's incredible at set decoration. But we thought, oh, it'd be nice to just have one centerpiece, maybe something that we can play with shadow and some shadow puppetry. And Anita just said, "Yep, I'm on it. What kind of color and look would you like?" And that was all her doing.
It serves the piece so beautifully because, like you said, you can incorporate the shadow puppetry, but also it's like this moon that's kind of perpetually in the background, but it feels like a patchwork quilt also, which like the grandma and like being snuggly, like it's such a beautiful, like an evocative piece. It's like it's a piece of art on its own that helps serve the storytelling.
I'm so glad it resonated. Yeah, Margot and Anita both amazing, because Jake and I joke with each other that we're just not as visually inclined. We try our best, and I I love making bits of visual art, but to have the eye to just see like we what colors, what shapes will create that mood. It's such a special skill.
Yeah. And I love how, like what you were talking about before, it takes a village to make a musical. Like it's not just sitting in your living room writing songs. You have all these different elements that have to come together to make a show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so how did the show come to be available to stream through the Stratfest Festival?
Uh, Jake had reached out to someone at StratFest I know. And just said on a whim, just said, "Hey, we happen to have filmed this thing. You know, I see you're doing this online platform." And they said, "Great, let's put it on our our Stratford platform." So it's a very, just like everything in this process, looking back, Louisa, it's all a matter of just throwing throwing ourselves out there and saying like, "Hey, does anybody interested in this maybe?" And Stratford were so great. They liked it immediately and were willing to put it up rather quickly. I think they appreciated that it was something ready made, um, that was all set to go. And
Mm.
I'm so grateful to the NextStage Festival for this too, because they let all the creators that year keep all the rights for the things that were filmed, which they really didn't have to do. Looking back, I just think what a gift.
Mm. And that's, I think, I wish that more fringe festivals operated with that model, because
Mhm.
that's the point, right? Is to be able to affordably create your work, put it on, have an audience see it, and then use it, use the materials afterwards. Like it's, especially in the US, there are so many people who I hear from who can't even film their work to start with. It's the
Wow.
rules around filming are so strict, and the cost of filming is horrendous. Like it's just exorbitant, and people can't afford to film in the first place, yet alone like what to do with it afterwards. There's a whole thing of whole string of rules around that. So I
Wow.
think yet it is really remarkable that they provided the resources for you to film it, and now that you can use it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jake and I feel so passionate about. I mean, I know obviously filmed musicals is your bag here, and I love a filmed musical. But even just a cast recording, I find Jake and I talk all the time about these new musicals that we hear all this buzz about that we want to hear the music. You know, that's our way in. And there's no real framework for cast recordings for smaller shows, at least here in Canada. So that's a future dream project of ours, is how can we set up some kind of cast recording and maybe filmed live, just an ecosystem of that. Just because a lot of people can't get up and buy the ticket and get to the theater necessarily, but
Yeah.
musicals should be for a broad group.
Yes, and creating that access, and access for audiences to hear the work and experience the work, but for artists to make their work known, and just it's a cast recording seems like the most entry level way for us to have access to a musical, but it's expensive, and it takes time, and it takes expertise, and most up and coming artists don't have the funds to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I will say, if anyone's listening in Canada, we were able to get Ontario Arts Council funding to do a cast recording of Ursa. So we're actually finishing recording that in the next couple of weeks, and then that'll be out this
Yeah.
year.
Ah, that's exciting.
But I highly encourage anyone in the theater world who wants to record their work, apply to Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council. We know a couple of other shows. This great show called a musical called A Perfect Bowl of Faux, who are also a fringe show.
I'm a
If
fan
it's not,
already.
what? Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
You have me at phone.
Oh, you'll love that show, Louisa. Had you heard of it by any chance?
No, I haven't, but I'm intrigued. I want to know what it is.
Oh, they're doing a cast recording right now, thanks to the Ontario Arts Council. So, yeah, look
Mm.
forward to that. It's just
That's
so
super
nice to be able to
cool.
recommend a show and also say, and you can go listen to it right now.
Yeah, I think it's so important. It really, and again, and this is my dead horse that I will beat till forever, that filming shows, in whatever incarnation, gives access and allows people to see the work and build a following. There are shows, like there was one show, Treason, that streamed. It was a concert version from the UK. It streamed during the pandemic, and now it's going to the West End because it built this following from an online stream, and making the process available to people through social media, and now they have this following, and it has enough of a following to be able to go to the West End. So like that, it does work.
That's so cool. Okay. Oh, I'm writing that Writing that down. I want to check that out. My goal in this podcast is to get at least one recommendation from you, Louise.
Excellent. My work here is done. And so with Ursa, what's happening next with Ursa? You mentioned the cast recording, which is very exciting, but what about either future streams? Will the stream be available again?
Yeah, so we have a few plans. We do have that cast recording, so that's the main thing, getting the final vocal takes done, and then we'll be mixing in February. That should be out by the summer. And you can follow the Uncommon Folk Collective on all of our social media to keep apprised of this. We're also looking at doing another run of the show at some point, hopefully in Toronto in the summer or fall. So just reaching out to theater companies and getting that in the works. And the other thing for people to check out is we released a lot of live off the floor versions of our songs, these performance videos. So even though you can't see the next stage video stream we're discussing right now, you can check out these live performances, which we did in the little town of Tweed, Ontario, and thereabouts. We filmed in a cave for some of the songs, which was very fun. So we got
no way.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so perfect.
It was wild. Yeah, we had a show cancellation, which we were kind of bummed about. But similar to Next Stage, we said, "Hey, we have some time now. Let's get someone to film this." So
Pivot.
yeah, exactly. We pivot. So those are fun. There's a couple of cave videos, and then we filmed on a TV set near Tweed, Ontario. So.
Oh, that's super cool. I'll make sure to have show links to all of that. Links to all of that in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. Very exciting. And you mentioned earlier you're working on some new projects. What can you share what those are yet?
So they're a little bit under wraps at the moment. Jake and I promised each other we wouldn't talk too much about them, but I'll say that the next musical we're writing has to do with property ownership, and how people cope with how difficult it is to find and keep a place to live right now. So we're writing a musical on that topic that we're hoping will be on the ground within a couple of years. Let's put a broad timeline on it.
The musical pipeline.
Yeah, that's right. It
could take 1, 7, 10 years. Who knows?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's all really fun stuff, and I'm sure there'll be other small projects for the collective between now and then.
Excellent. And I hope that the stream becomes available again to folks. It's such a gorgeous capture of such a beautiful show, and I would love more people to be able to see it.
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there will be another chance. I mean, just thinking about it and talking about it today, I'm thinking, oh, should we just put it on our YouTube page, So stay tuned for that.
Say yes.
Yeah, if you subscribe to Ursa Folk Musical, you might see it pop up one of these days.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, this is so wonderful. I just think this is a delightful show, and it's so lovely to learn a little bit more about it. This brings us to my final segment called My Favorite Things, where I ask you my favorite questions. These are a few of my favorite things. So to start off with, what is your favorite musical?
I love this. I love a lightning round. Favorite musical right now is A Strange Loop.
Yes.
Incredible show. Or, Sunday in the Park with George is my all-time.
Yeah. Oh, always a classic. Gets me every time.
Oh,
we were the Super Bowl is happening in a few weeks here, and the usher is performing, and we were joking, and I work at a theater, and we were joking if only it was Usher from A Strange Loop. That would be a very different halftime show.
I would. That's the world I want to live in. That's perfect.
It's still making me laugh. What is your favorite filmed live musical?
Favorite filmed live musical? I mean, I hate to repeat myself, but the Sunday in the Park with George filmed show with Mandy Patinkin in it is, unbelievable that we have that filmed. It's like if there was ever a case for filming musicals, that's it for me.
Yes, what you just said, exactly that. A filmed live musical is not exactly a stage show and it's not exactly a movie. So what should we call it?
Interesting. Yeah, what's the term? Um uh you got me thinking about this, Louisa. Have you, I mean, the podcast is called Filmed Live Musicals. So you've probably thought about this more than I have. Do you have a term that you've heard used that you love?
I like pro shot gets thrown around a lot,
Mm,
capture, broadcast,
mm.
sinacast. There's so many different terms, but we don't have like even, the title of my website, the title of this podcast, I say it and people are like, I don't know what that is. And then when you like, like Hamilton or Sunday in the Park with George or Into the
Right.
Woods, and like, yeah, I love those. Or, I grew up watching them. That's why I got into musicals. Like so often that's the response. But we, as an industry, we don't have a name for it yet, like a universal name that people instantly recognize what it is. So
Yeah.
it's like my favorite torture question because we don't know yet.
You know what? It took me a minute, Louisa, but I am thinking here in town we have a theater that does stage to screen shows. And I kind of like that term, stage to screen, as kind of a broad category. But yeah, musicals specifically. Hmm.
What can you describe what that program is? What is the stage to screen?
Oh, sure. So it's musicals or plays shown at the theater like you would a movie.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So like stuff that's filmed on stage.
Yeah, like they just showed Waitress the musical
Ah,
at the cinema and called it stage to screen. So I kind of like that. It gets towards what we're talking about.
yeah. I'm very envious you have the whole theater that's dedicated to that.
It's very cool. Yeah, it's nice that they do
Ah,
that. Oh.
I'm coming to visit.
It sounds good. Sounds good. Mm.
Where do you stand on bootlegs?
Oh, I'm all for bootlegs. Um, no, I shouldn't say that. It is complicated. I think that frankly, without bootlegs, I wouldn't have discovered about half the shows I adore. Over the pandemic, I finally saw a bootleg of Assassins, the Stephen Sondheim show, and it was just so inspiring to be able to see that. Um, and I think because we don't have the infrastructure to film like really culturally significant musicals all the time, like you can't see a Strange Loop, as far as I know, filmed at the moment. As long as we don't have that built into our theater ecosystem, I do think bootlegs are a really vital tool for getting the show for access, for getting the shows to people. But
Yeah.
of course, the question of ideally that would translate into more money for the people making this work. Well,
Hmm.
that's my roundabout way of endorsing bootlegs.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really thoughtful answer, and you hit the nail on the head when it comes to like why bootlegs exist. Like it's because people want to watch the shows. And
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
provide access, so people are going to keep accessing them until the ecosystem figures out a way to make it viable. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really love
I
your answer.
I do love that like the Tiny Desk concerts, those NPR concerts are doing a lot of musicals these days. Um which I think is a really helpful thing too, like a nice alternative. You get the
Mm.
gist of like they did one for Sweeney Todd recently, and they've done a bunch. So I love that as kind of a bridge in between. It's not the same cost of actually going in and filming, but you get the cast, you get the songs, you get the feeling.
Yeah, it's yeah, a gateway.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What stage musicals do you wish had been filmed?
Oh my goodness. Um, I do. Wow, yeah. There's so many flipping through my brain. I think I'm a big fan of strange musicals that don't last very long, honestly, and those like curios in the musical theater canon. I was recently reading about the Have you heard of Hands on a Hard Body, the musical?
Yeah.
Oh, that okay. That's one that I saw the documentary recently, and I thought, oh, this would be a great idea for a musical.
And lo and behold, it was on Broadway.
And there you go. Yeah,
Lasted all of like 2 minutes.
exactly. So honestly, that kind of show, I would love to see. I've been following the Bad Cinderella saga on Broadway too, and part of me is like, oh, I'd love to see that show. So just the
They live
document.
streamed the opening of Act 2 of Bad Cinderella like on
Oh,
TikTok or something when it was open on Broadway. And
oh, cool. Okay.
very interesting. The costumes are gorgeous. I'll give it that.
Fair enough. That's all I need to hear.
Always find the positive. What would you like to see filmed in the future?
More indie theater. I'd love to see just more shows that are just getting going, filmed right off the bat. I'm a huge Anais Mitchell fan, and I've been following her work since well before Hadestown, just as her folk albums are incredible. And I really wish I could see like a filmed version of the original Hadestown that was essentially just a concert.
Yeah.
Because that's so in line with the work I love to do. So, yeah.
Oh, I second that. Yes.
Are you a Hadestown fan?
I am a huge fan. It's actually where I work also.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
I'm there like, 6 to 8 times a week.
I love that. Oh, lucky you.
Yeah. It is. It's I'm quite obsessed. I could watch it 1,000 times more. It's just so beautiful. And we
Totally
have a
agree.
killer cast right now. And
Oh,
I want them to film it, but I have it on good authority. It's not going to be filmed, which, you can watch it at the New York Public Library, the original cast. They did film the original cast, but which will be available in the distant future when the show closes. But as far as I'm aware, there won't be a professional capture.
okay. Oh, it's too bad. But bless the public library for making some of those things available. That's nice.
Oh yeah, the New York Public Library Theatre and Film and Tape Archive is an absolute treasure trove. And yeah, that's a whole podcast. But yeah, I love that place. Finally, where can we find you online?
So you can, if you search Uncommon Folk Collective, all of our stuff will come up. We got an Instagram, we got a Facebook page, and all of my social media is under the name Samson Wrote, Samson wrote, like you wrote down a play. And that's for all my folk music adventures.
And that reminds me, I loved your album Pigeon. I took a listen and it was gorgeous. I can't wait to hear more of your music.
Oh, thanks, Louisa. Yeah, I have another album coming out this year. So
yay,
yeah.
you were busy.
A lot of stuff going on, but it's just it feels like that's the balm these days. That's what feels, with so much else going on, like just taking an hour every day and trying to be creative, I find is the solution, at least just to get by day to day.
Oh, that's a perfect note to end on. Beautiful. And I will have links to all of your socials in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Louisa. This was so much fun, and thank you for doing this show. I know doing a podcast is a lot of work, but you're a marvelous host, and it's
Oh, thank you. The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons. FilmedLiveMusicals.com features information on nearly 200 filmed stage musicals from around the world and dating back to 1938, a weekly newsletter with upcoming streams, and this very podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and make sure to sign up for the weekly newsletter to have upcoming streams delivered straight to your inbox. Filmed Live Musicals is financially supported by Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Andy Capone, Elliot Charles, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Hannah Graneman, James T. Lane, Jim McCarthy, Allison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tillotson, and Beck Twist. If you would also like to support the preservation of the history of film stage musicals and the creation of one easy place to find them all, you can now make a tax-deductible donation to Filmed Live Musicals via The Field. Visit filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.